I had just pulled into my driveway after a long day when I noticed a woman I had never seen before standing on my front porch. She looked completely comfortable, like she owned the place, arms crossed, chin lifted with that unmistakable entitled confidence. Her name, as I would soon learn, was Karen. At first, I thought maybe she was lost or waiting for someone, but the moment our eyes met, she marched straight toward me as if I had kept her waiting on purpose. Before I could even ask what she was doing there, she demanded my house keys. Not asked, demanded. She said she needed to get inside her property and didn't have time for games. I laughed at first, thinking this was some strange misunderstanding, but she didn't laugh back. Her expression only hardened, and she insisted that this house, the one I'd lived in for years, the one I worked endlessly to afford, now belonged to her. She said she was the new owner and that I needed to hand over the keys immediately so she could inspect her home. My stomach twisted. Something was off. Something big. I asked her for proof. Any proof at all, paperwork, ID, even a name of the realtor she supposedly worked with. She refused to give anything. Instead, she stepped closer, lowering her voice like she was warning me. She said people like me shouldn't question her authority. When I didn't give in, she pulled out her phone with this dramatic gasp and told me she had no choice but to call 911. And right there, on my driveway, she reported me as a trespasser on my own property. She claimed she didn't feel safe and that I was refusing to leave her home. The moment she ended the call, she gave me a smug smile, like she had already won. I could hear my heart pounding as sirens echoed faintly in the distance. Now, I was standing there, waiting for the police to arrive, wondering how far the situation would go and if they would believe her story over mine. While I stood there waiting for the police to show up, I kept replaying the last few minutes in my head, trying to figure out how a complete stranger convinced herself she owned my house. The thing is, nothing about her claim made sense. I had bought this place 3 years ago, signed every paper, paid every bill, and dealt with every repair myself. There had been no listings, no open houses, nothing that could have confused anyone. Yet the way Karen acted so sure, so confident made me wonder what her angle was. I stepped a little farther away from her, giving myself space to breathe. She stayed planted near my front door, tapping her foot like she was waiting for a table at a restaurant that had messed up her reservation. Every now and then, she'd shoot me a smug glance, the kind that said she thought the police would instantly take her side. I couldn't understand her level of certainty. It wasn't just entitlement. It was like she truly believed her story, or wanted me to believe it. As I stood there, I thought about the last few weeks. There hadn't been any suspicious letters, no weird calls from realtors, no strangers creeping around the property. The only odd thing that had happened was a man in a suit knocking on my door 2 weeks ago asking if I'd consider selling. I told him no, and he left politely. I hadn't thought about it since, but now, it suddenly felt connected. Karen kept pacing like she was rehearsing something in her head. At one point, she pulled out a folder from her bag and started flipping through papers, deliberately turning them toward me like she wanted me to see something, but never actually letting me get close enough to read anything. It felt staged, like she wanted the police to catch her pretending to have documents. The sirens grew louder, echoing down the block. My neighbors peeked out from behind curtains, confused by the flashing lights approaching our quiet street. I felt my stomach sink even deeper. What if the officers didn't give me a chance to explain before reacting to her dramatic accusation? Karen straightened her posture, plastered a fake worried look on her face, and held the folder against her chest like it was some kind of proof. And in that moment, all I could think was whatever she was planning, it hadn't even started yet. The police car rolled to a stop in front of my driveway, and the moment the officers stepped out, Karen rushed toward them like she had been the one in danger. She put on this shaky voice, clutching her folder dramatically, telling them she was the rightful owner and that I had refused to leave her property. The officers exchanged a quick glance, the kind they give when something feels off, but they're still required to follow procedure. One of them, Officer Daniels, asked me to step aside so he could speak to me separately. His tone wasn't aggressive, but it was cautious, like he didn't want to assume anything. He asked for my ID and proof of residence, and thankfully, I had everything in my wallet and on my phone. As I pulled up the utility bills and mortgage documents, Karen kept interrupting from across the yard, insisting that I was stalling and faking paperwork. It didn't help that she talked loud enough for the entire street to hear. While the officer reviewed my documents, I noticed another police car stop at the end of the street. A man stepped out, someone I recognized. It was the same guy who had knocked on my door a few weeks earlier asking if I would consider selling. He wasn't wearing a suit this time, just jeans and a dark jacket, but I couldn't forget his face. He walked toward the driveway slowly, almost too casually, like he didn't want to draw attention. My nerves tightened. Why was he here now? And why did Karen look relieved the moment she noticed him? She even gave him a quick nod, like this was all part of something they both understood. The officers hadn't noticed him yet, but I could see the tension in Karen's body ease, like she finally had backup. The man stopped near the curb, pretending to be on his phone, but he kept glancing at the officers and then back at my house. It felt like something bigger was going on, something I wasn't supposed to figure out. Officer Daniels handed me back my documents, but before he could say anything, Karen pointed at the man near the curb and shouted, "He can confirm everything." And that was the moment I realized this wasn't just about a misunderstanding. It was becoming something much more complicated. When Karen pointed toward the man standing near the curb, the officers finally turned to look at him. He slipped his phone into his pocket and walked over with this calm, confident stride, like he already knew he would be believed. My stomach tightened as he approached. He greeted the officers politely, then nodded at Karen, and for a second, it felt like they had rehearsed this moment. He introduced himself as Mark and claimed he was a representative for the new buyer. The way he said it made it sound official, like the kind of line someone practices to make sure it lands perfectly. He explained that Karen had recently purchased the home and that there had been some paperwork delays with the county records. That's why, according to him, the documents hadn't shown up yet. Officer Daniels looked at him carefully, not fully convinced, but not dismissing him either. I stepped forward and told them that Mark had come to my house weeks ago asking if I wanted to sell and that I had clearly refused. Mark didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled like he expected me to say that. He told the officers he had spoken to multiple homeowners in the area, so maybe I had gotten confused about who he really talked to. Karen quickly backed him up, repeating the same details, almost word for word. It was too synchronized, too smooth. My chest tightened as I realized they were trying to create just enough doubt to make the situation look unclear. The officers asked Mark if he had any actual documents. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a thin folder. Inside were copies of something that looked like transfer papers, but even from a distance, I could see the text didn't look official. The formatting was all wrong, but Karen acted like she had just seen gold. While the officers looked over the papers, my neighbor, Mr. Grant, stepped onto his porch. He squinted toward the driveway, curiosity turning quickly into concern. He'd lived next door for years. He knew when I bought the place. And the second he saw Mark and Karen standing together, his expression changed. He started walking over slowly, hands in his pockets, watching everyone like he was putting pieces together. Mark noticed him too, and for the first time, his confident expression slipped. Just a small flicker, but enough. It felt like everything was tightening around this one moment. The officers comparing stories, Karen whispering urgently to Mark, and Mr. Grant approaching with a look that suggested he knew something nobody else did. And right then, I sensed the situation was about to explode into something none of us were prepared for. Mr. Grant stopped at the edge of my driveway, taking in the scene with a slow, steady look. He glanced at the officers, then at me, and finally at Mark and Karen. His jaw tightened as if he already sensed something wasn't right. Before anyone could speak, he said calmly, "I don't know what these two are telling you, but this house has had the same owner for years. I watched him move in. I've never seen either of them near this place before today." Karen immediately snapped, trying to shut him down. She insisted he was mistaken and that she had visited the house multiple times during the buying process. But even the officers seemed thrown off by that claim. If she had visited often, How come none of the neighbors had ever spotted her? Mark stepped forward, trying to regain control. He said he had confidential agreements with the previous owner and that he couldn't reveal everything. That statement alone made Officer Daniels raise an eyebrow. But then something unexpected happened. Another car turned onto the street, an older silver sedan with a dented bumper. It slowed near my driveway. The driver rolled down the window, looking confused at the flashing lights. I didn't recognize him, but Karen and Mark did. Their faces changed instantly, like they had just seen a ghost walk out of the past. The man got out and approached the group cautiously. "What's going on here?" he asked, directing the question at Karen and Mark, not the officers. His voice wasn't angry, it was tired, disappointed, like he had been through this before. Karen's face went pale. Mark stepped back, suddenly guarded. The officers noticed the shift and turned toward the newcomer. The man sighed deeply and rubbed the back of his neck. Then he said something that stopped everyone cold. "I told both of you to drop this. The deal fell apart weeks ago. You were never supposed to come back here." The officers froze, staring at him. Karen whispered, "You said we still had a chance." He shook his head slowly. "Not like this. Not by pretending to own someone else's home." Ul's hammered. The officers turned toward Karen and Mark, their expressions sharpening. The situation wasn't just complicated anymore, it had spiraled into something far darker than a simple property dispute. The moment the man admitted they were never supposed to come back, everything shifted. Officer Daniels stepped between us, holding up a hand to separate everyone. Karen's confidence cracked for the first time. Mark tried to back away, but the second officer moved quickly to block him. It felt like all the pieces that had been scattered through this whole mess were finally snapping into place. When the officers asked the man to explain, he didn't resist. He looked genuinely exhausted, like he'd been carrying a secret that finally became too heavy. He confessed that he used to work for a small real estate group that had been trying to buy distressed properties in the neighborhood. They had attempted to reach an agreement with me, but when I declined, their team was supposed to move on. Instead, Mark and Karen decided to take things into their own hands, hoping they could pressure me into giving up the house by creating confusion and forcing police involvement. Karen shook her head violently, insisting he was lying. She claimed she really believed the house belonged to her, but Officer Daniels wasn't buying it anymore. He confronted her with the inconsistencies in her story, and when he showed her the fake documents, her face fell. Mark tried to argue that they were placeholders until the real paperwork was finalized, but the officer pointed out that forging official forms was a serious offense. Just when it seemed like everything was finally settling into place, the unexpected twist hit. The man who had arrived, the one trying to stop them, revealed that Karen and Mark hadn't just done this to me. He quietly admitted they had targeted at least 2 other homes in nearby counties, using the same tactic. They'd hoped that sooner or later, someone would panic or slip up enough to leave their property vulnerable. As the officers placed Mark and Karen in handcuffs, Karen suddenly turned to me, her voice trembling with anger and desperation. She said, "You don't understand. Someone else promised us this would work. Someone bigger." The officers exchanged glances. I felt a shiver run through me. Even as they were led away, the final twist hung in the air. This entire scheme might have been part of something larger, and whoever had orchestrated it was still out there, watching from the shadows. When the police cars finally pulled away and the street grew quiet again, I stood in my driveway feeling like the ground under me had changed forever. The officers promised they would investigate the claim that someone bigger was behind the scam, but they assured me I was safe for now. They encouraged me to keep my security cameras running, document everything, and contact them if anyone suspicious returned. Even with that reassurance, it took a minute for my nerves to settle. The idea that my home, my safe place, had been targeted shook me more than I wanted to admit. Mr. Grant stayed with me for a while, making sure I wasn't left alone right after the chaos. He told me he had seen unusual cars passing through the neighborhood over the last few months, though he never imagined they were tied to something like this. Hearing that made me realize how easily small signs blend into everyday life, until something forces you to put the pieces together. I thanked him, grateful he stepped in when he did. Without him, The officers might have taken a lot longer to see through the lies. Over the next few days, detectives reached out with updates. They confirmed that Karen and Mark had been working off promises from a person who specialized in finding homeowners who lived alone, hoping they could intimidate or confuse them. Most of the time the attempts failed, but sometimes enough pressure scared people into selling quickly. It was a slow-moving scam, one meant to wear people down rather than snatch anything overnight. Knowing that made me appreciate how important it is to stay aware of your surroundings and trust your instincts. Life slowly returned to normal, though I installed extra lights, replaced a few locks, and talked to my neighbors more often. The whole experience taught me that protecting your home isn't just about physical security, it's about knowing your rights, paying attention, and speaking up when something feels wrong. As I sat on my porch a week later, watching the sun dip behind the houses, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt since that day. My home was still mine, and the truth had come out. And while I knew the world could sometimes surprise you in unsettling ways, I also realized that standing your ground and having a few good neighbors can make all the difference in keeping your life steady.